My sister and mom left my 5-year-old at the zoo as a lesson, then denied everything, but zoo security cameras caught them red-handed and now they're paying the price. I'm a 34-year-old mother and I need to write this down because I can't believe what happened to my family. My husband Brock, 36M, and I have been married for 8 years. We have a son named Ford, 5M, who just started kindergarten this year. Brock works as an IT manager at a tech company and makes decent money. I work part-time as a dental hygienist at a local clinic. We live in a suburban neighborhood about 30 minutes from the city. Our house is nothing fancy, but it's comfortable for our small family. Brock and I both come from middle-class backgrounds and we've worked hard to build a stable life for Ford. My son is a bright kid who loves dinosaurs and building blocks. He's been asking for months to visit the Natural History Museum and the zoo for his upcoming 6th birthday. My mother Linda, 58F, has always been involved in our lives. She volunteers at the local animal shelter and runs a small dog grooming business from her home. She's known in our neighborhood for organizing charity drives and fundraisers. People always compliment her on how caring and generous she is with animals and children. My sister Karen, 32F, is a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids of her own, Gemma, 7F, and Luke, 4M. She's married to a successful accountant and they live in a bigger house across town. Karen has always been the favorite child. She was the one who got straight A's in school while I struggled with math. She married young to a man with good prospects while I took longer to find my path. My parents helped Karen and her husband with the down payment on their house, but when Brock and I needed help with our mortgage, they said they didn't have extra money. I've learned to accept that Karen gets different treatment, but it still stings sometimes. 3 weeks ago, Ford kept asking about his birthday plans. He specifically wanted to go to the zoo to see the new dinosaur exhibit they had opened. The problem was that Brock and I both had work commitments on that Saturday. I was scheduled for a mandatory training session at the dental office that I couldn't miss without facing consequences. Brock had an important client presentation that had been scheduled for months. When I mentioned this to my mother during our weekly phone call, she immediately offered to take Ford to the zoo. Karen was visiting that day with her kids, so she said it would be perfect timing. They could take all 3 children together and make it a fun group outing. My mother insisted it would be no trouble at all and that Ford would have a wonderful time with his cousins. I felt hesitant about the arrangement. Ford had never been on a big outing without either Brock or me present. He's generally well behaved, but he can get excited and wander off if something catches his attention. I've always been the type of parent who keeps a close eye on him in crowded places. When I expressed my concerns, my mother laughed and said I was being overprotective. She reminded me that she had successfully raised 2 daughters and that Karen was an experienced mother of 2. Karen chimed in during the conversation and said she was looking forward to taking Ford. She mentioned that she had taken her own children to the zoo several times and knew all the best spots. She also said that Ford would benefit from spending time with his cousins and learning to be more independent. Both my mother and sister kept emphasizing how much fun it would be and how Ford would remember this birthday forever. The night before the zoo trip, I packed Ford's backpack with snacks, water, and his emergency contact information. I wrote down my phone number, Brock's phone number, and our address on a piece of paper and put it in his pocket. I also made sure he knew our phone numbers by heart. Ford was incredibly excited and kept talking about seeing the dinosaurs and playing with Gemma and Luke. That Saturday morning, my mother picked up Ford at 8 a.m. She seemed cheerful and kept reassuring me that everything would be fine. Karen was already in the car with her 2 children, and they all seemed excited about the day ahead. Ford gave me a big hug and promised to tell me all about the dinosaurs when he got back. I watched them drive away and went to get ready for my training session. The training session went well and I finished around 2 p.m. I checked my phone and saw that I had missed several calls from an unknown number. When I called back, a woman identified herself as Sarah from the zoo's Lost Children department. She told me that Ford had been found alone near the reptile house about an hour ago. She said he was safe but upset, and that they needed me to come pick him up immediately. I felt my stomach drop. I asked Sarah what had happened to the adults who were supposed to be watching him. She said that Ford told them his grandmother and aunt had left him sitting on a bench and told him to wait for them. When they didn't come back after 30 minutes, other visitors noticed him crying and brought him to the security office. I immediately called my mother's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called Karen's phone and got the same result. I called Brock and told him what had happened. He left his presentation immediately and met me at the zoo. The drive there felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. When we arrived at the zoo, Ford was sitting in the security office with a zoo employee. He had been crying and kept asking why his grandmother and aunt had left him. The staff member, Sarah, explained that Ford had been found around 1:30 p.m. near the reptile exhibit. He told them that his grandmother had told him to sit on a bench and wait while she and his aunt went to get ice cream. When they didn't return, he started walking around looking for them and got lost. Sarah also mentioned that they had made several announcements over the zoo's public address system calling for Linda and Karen to come to the lost children area. No one had responded to these announcements. The zoo had security cameras throughout the facility, and Sarah said they could review the footage if needed to understand what had happened. Brock and I took Ford home and he seemed subdued for the rest of the day. He kept asking if he had done something wrong and why his grandmother and aunt had left him. We tried to reassure him that it wasn't his fault, but he clearly didn't understand what had happened. Later that evening, I finally got a call back from my mother. She sounded casual and unconcerned when she asked how Ford was doing. I asked her directly what had happened at the zoo. She said there must have been some kind of misunderstanding and that she and Karen had been looking for Ford everywhere. She claimed they had checked with security and been told that he had already been picked up by his parents. This didn't make sense because the zoo staff had told us that Ford was found at 1:30 p.m., and no one had responded to the announcements they made. I pointed this out to my mother, and she became defensive. She said that it was a busy day at the zoo and that children get separated from their guardians all the time. She insisted that it was just an unfortunate accident and that everyone was making too big a deal about it. When I asked to speak to Karen, my mother said she had already gone home and was busy with her own children. She suggested that we all just move on from the incident and focus on making sure Ford had enjoyed his birthday outing. This response made me more upset because it showed no acknowledgement of how serious the situation had been. The next day, I called Karen directly. She gave me a similar story about looking everywhere for Ford and being told by zoo staff that he had been picked up. However, her details didn't match what my mother had told me. Karen said they had been near the gift shop when they realized Ford was missing, while my mother had said they were at the food court. I decided to call the zoo back and speak with Sarah again. I asked her if she could provide more details about what had happened. She told me that their security footage showed my mother and Karen leaving the zoo through the main entrance at approximately 1:15 p.m. Ford was not with them at that time. The footage also showed Ford sitting alone on a bench near the reptile house starting around 1 p.m. This information directly contradicted what both my mother and Karen had told me. According to the security footage, they had left the zoo 15 minutes before Ford was even found by other visitors. There was no evidence of them looking for him or checking with security as they had claimed. I confronted my mother with this information during a phone call. She became very defensive and accused me of not trusting her. She said that the zoo security must have made a mistake and that she would never abandon her grandson. She also mentioned that she had been volunteering with children and animals for years and that her reputation in the community spoke for itself. Karen's response was similar when I called her. She said that the security footage must have been from a different day or that the zoo staff had misidentified them. She also said that I was being dramatic and that Ford was fine, so there was no reason to keep bringing up the incident. Both my mother and Karen have been avoiding my calls since then. When I do manage to reach them, they change the subject or make excuses to end the conversation quickly. Ford has been asking when he can see his grandmother and cousins again, but I don't know what to tell him. Brock thinks we should demand a full explanation and consider involving the police if necessary. He's particularly upset because he feels that our son could have been seriously hurt or kidnapped while he was alone at the zoo. I'm torn between wanting to protect my relationship with my family and making sure that Ford's safety is never compromised again. I keep thinking about what could have happened if other visitors hadn't noticed Ford crying and brought him to security. The zoo is a huge place with thousands of visitors on weekends. A 5-year-old child could easily get lost or hurt without proper supervision. The fact that my mother and Karen seem unwilling to take responsibility for what happened makes me question whether I can trust them with Ford in the future. I need advice on how to handle this situation. Should I give my mother and Karen the benefit of the doubt and accept their explanations? Or should I take Brock's advice and demand a full accounting of what happened that day? I'm struggling with the possibility that my own family members might have deliberately abandoned my son, but the evidence seems to point in that direction. Update 1 I posted 3 weeks ago about my mother and sister leaving my son at the zoo. I want to thank everyone who commented and gave me advice. A lot of people suggested that I needed to get to the bottom of what really happened that day, and I've learned some things that have made the situation much worse. After my original post, I decided to take Brock's advice and push for more information. I called the zoo again and spoke with a supervisor in their security department. I explained that there seemed to be conflicting stories about what had happened, and I asked if they could provide me with more details from their security footage. The supervisor, whose name was Mark, was very helpful. He said that incidents like this were taken seriously by the zoo, and he was willing to work with me to understand what had happened. He offered to set up a meeting where I could review the relevant security footage myself. Brock and I went to the zoo the following Tuesday to meet with Mark. He took us to a security office where they had compiled footage from several different cameras that covered the areas where Ford had been that day. What we saw was much worse than I had originally thought. The footage showed my mother, Karen, and all 3 children arriving at the zoo around 9:30 a.m. For the first few hours, everything looked normal. They visited various exhibits together, and the children appeared to be having a good time. Around 12:30 p.m., the group stopped at the food court for lunch. After lunch, the footage showed them walking toward the reptile house. At 12:55 p.m., my mother could be seen talking to Ford and pointing to a bench. Ford sat down on the bench while my mother and Karen walked away with Gemma and Luke. The camera angle made it clear that my mother was giving Ford specific instructions to stay in that spot. What happened next was the most disturbing part. Instead of returning to get Ford, the footage showed my mother and Karen taking Gemma and Luke to the gift shop. They spent about 15 minutes there, during which time Ford remained sitting on the bench as instructed. Then, at 1:15 p.m., the footage showed all 4 adults and children leaving the zoo through the main entrance. Ford was not with them. The security footage proved that my mother and Karen had deliberately left Ford at the zoo. This wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. They had intentionally told him to wait on a bench and then left the premises without him. The timestamps on the footage made it impossible for them to claim they had been looking for him or that they had checked with security. Mark also provided me with a written report that documented the incident. The report included the exact times that Ford was found, the announcements that were made over the public address system, and the lack of response from any adults claiming to be his guardians. This report would serve as official documentation of what had happened. When I got home from the zoo, I immediately called my mother and demanded an explanation. I told her that I had seen the security footage and that I knew exactly what had happened. Instead of apologizing or showing remorse, she became angry and defensive. She accused me of spying on her and said that I was making too much of a simple mistake. I asked her to explain how leaving a 5-year-old alone at the zoo could be considered a simple mistake. She said that Ford was old enough to sit still for a few minutes and that she had planned to come back for him after taking Gemma and Luke to the gift shop. She claimed that she had lost track of time and that it was an oversight, not intentional abandonment. This explanation didn't make sense because the footage clearly showed her leaving the zoo with everyone else. I pointed this out, and she became more defensive. She said that Karen had insisted they leave and that she had assumed Karen would go back for Ford. She also said that she thought I was being overdramatic and that Ford was fine, so there was no real harm done. When I called Karen to get her side of the story, she gave me a completely different explanation. She said that my mother had told her that Ford was meeting us at the zoo entrance and that she had believed him to be with his parents already. She claimed that she had no idea Ford was still inside the zoo when they left. The fact that Karen and my mother were giving me contradictory stories made it clear that they were both lying. Neither of them was willing to take responsibility for what had happened, and both seemed more concerned with protecting themselves than with acknowledging the harm they had caused. I decided to share the security footage and the zoo's official report with other family members. I sent copies to my father and to Karen's husband, Tom. I wanted them to understand the full extent of what had happened and to see the evidence for themselves. My father's response surprised me. He called me within an hour of receiving the footage and said that he was horrified by what he had seen. He said that he had been married to my mother for 35 years and had never seen her do anything like this before. He promised to talk to her and demand an explanation. Tom's response was different. He called me 2 days later and said that he had watched the footage and spoken with Karen about it. He said that Karen had admitted to him that she had known Ford was still at the zoo when they left. She had told Tom that she thought it would be a good lesson for Ford to learn independence and that she believed zoo staff would take care of him until we arrived. This revelation made me realize that both my mother and Karen had planned to leave Ford at the zoo. This wasn't an accident or an oversight. They had made a deliberate decision to abandon a 5-year-old child in a crowded public place. The fact that they had lied to me about it afterward made their actions even worse. Tom also told me that he was reconsidering his marriage to Karen. He said that he had always known she could be selfish and manipulative, but he had never thought she would endanger a child. He said that if she was willing to abandon her own nephew, he worried about what she might do to their own children in the future. The following week, my father called me again with more information. He said that he had confronted my mother about the incident and that she had finally admitted the truth. According to him, she had been annoyed by Ford's behavior at the zoo and had decided to teach him a lesson by leaving him alone for a while. She had intended to come back for him after an hour or two, but Karen had convinced her to leave entirely. My father said that he was deeply disappointed in my mother's actions and that he was considering leaving her. He said that he couldn't understand how she could have put her own grandson in danger and then lied about it for weeks. He also said that he was worried about her judgment and whether she could be trusted with children in the future. This information confirmed what I had suspected based on the security footage. My mother and Karen had deliberately abandoned Ford at the zoo, and they had planned to leave him there for an extended period. The fact that they had lied about it afterward showed that they knew their actions were wrong. I decided that I needed to protect Ford from any future contact with my mother and Karen. I called both of them and told them that they were no longer welcome in our home and that they would not be allowed to spend time with Ford unsupervised. I also told them that I would be sharing the security footage and the zoo's report with other family members and friends so that everyone would know what had happened. Both my mother and Karen became very angry when I told them this. They accused me of being vindictive and of trying to destroy their reputations in the community. They said that I was overreacting and that Ford had not been seriously harmed by their actions. I told them that the potential for harm was what mattered, not the fact that Ford had been lucky enough to be found by caring strangers. I also pointed out that their willingness to lie about the incident showed that they understood it was wrong, even if they weren't willing to admit it. Since that conversation, neither my mother nor Karen has attempted to contact me or Ford. Brock has been very supportive throughout this process, and he agrees that we need to protect our son from people who would deliberately put him in danger. Ford has been asking about his grandmother and aunt, but we've told him that they're busy with other things and won't be visiting for a while. I've also been in contact with the animal shelter where my mother volunteers. I felt that they needed to know about the incident since she works with children there as well. The shelter's director was very concerned when I shared the security footage and the zoo's report. She said that they would be reviewing my mother's volunteer status and considering whether she should continue working with children. Looking back, I realized that there were warning signs that I should have noticed. My mother had always been somewhat controlling and had a tendency to prioritize her own convenience over other people's needs. Karen had always been selfish and had a history of manipulating situations to her advantage. I had assumed that they would put Ford's safety first, but I was wrong. The hardest part of this situation has been accepting that my own family members were willing to endanger my child. I keep thinking about what could have happened if Ford had wandered away from that bench or if he had been approached by someone with bad intentions. The zoo is a large, crowded place with many potential dangers for a young child. I'm still processing the fact that my mother and Karen not only abandoned Ford but also lied about it for weeks. Their willingness to deceive me about such a serious matter makes me question whether I can trust them about anything else. I'm also concerned about what other incidents might have occurred that I don't know about. Brock and I are now planning to have Ford's 6th birthday party at our house with just close friends and Brock's family. We want to make sure that he has a safe and happy celebration without the stress of wondering whether his grandmother and aunt might put him in danger again. Update 2: It's been 6 weeks since my last update, and things have gotten even more complicated. I found out some additional information that has made me realize this situation was worse than I originally thought. About 2 weeks after my last update, I got a call from my cousin Rachel. She's my father's sister's daughter, and we've always been close. Rachel told me that she had been talking to other family members about what happened at the zoo, and she had learned some disturbing information. Rachel said that my Aunt Mary, who is my father's sister, had told her about an incident that happened 2 years ago. At that time, my mother had been babysitting Mary's daughter Sophie, who was 4 years old. My mother had taken Sophie to a grocery store, and according to Mary, she had left Sophie alone in the car for over 30 minutes while she went shopping. Mary had only found out about this incident because Sophie had mentioned it weeks later during a conversation. When Mary confronted my mother about leaving Sophie alone in the car, my mother had claimed that she had only been gone for 5 minutes and that Sophie was being dramatic. Mary had decided not to make a big deal about it at the time, but she had never allowed my mother to babysit Sophie again. Rachel also told me that my cousin Brian, who is Karen's age, had a similar story. About 3 years ago, Karen had been watching Brian's son Michael, who was 6 at the time. Karen had taken Michael to a park, and according to Brian, she had left him there alone while she went to meet a friend for coffee. Michael had been found by other parents at the park, who had called Brian when they couldn't find any adults supervising the child. When Brian had confronted Karen about this incident, she had claimed that she had only stepped away for a few minutes and that she had been able to see Michael the entire time. Brian had been upset about the situation, but Karen had convinced him that it was just a misunderstanding. However, Brian had never allowed Karen to watch Michael unsupervised again. Learning about these previous incidents made me realize that what happened to Ford wasn't an isolated occurrence. Both my mother and Karen had a pattern of leaving children unsupervised in potentially dangerous situations. The fact that they had lied about these incidents and tried to minimize their seriousness showed that they knew their behavior was wrong. I decided to call Mary and Brian directly to get more details about what had happened. Mary confirmed Rachel's story and said that she had been very upset about the incident with Sophie. She said that leaving a 4-year-old alone in a car, especially during warm weather, was incredibly dangerous. She also said that she had considered reporting the incident to Child Protective Services but had decided against it because she didn't want to cause family drama. Brian also confirmed his story about Karen leaving Michael at the park. He said that he had been furious when he found out what had happened, but Karen had been very good at making excuses and convincing people that she hadn't done anything wrong. He said that he had always felt uncomfortable about the incident but had tried to give Karen the benefit of the doubt. Both Mary and Brian said that they were not surprised to learn about what had happened to Ford at the zoo. They said that my mother and Karen had shown a pattern of putting their own convenience ahead of children's safety. They also said that they were glad I had decided to keep Ford away from them. This information made me realize that I needed to warn other family members who might be considering leaving their children with my mother or Karen. I decided to send an email to my extended family explaining what had happened at the zoo and sharing the information about the previous incidents. The response to my email was mixed. Some family members were supportive and said that they were glad I had shared the information. Others accused me of trying to destroy my mother's and Karen's reputations and said that I was being vindictive. A few family members said that they didn't want to get involved in family drama and asked me not to include them in future communications about the situation. My father's response was particularly difficult. He called me after receiving the email and said that he was upset about the additional information I had shared. He said that he had been trying to work things out with my mother and that my email had made the situation more complicated. He also said that he felt like I was airing the family's dirty laundry and that some things should be kept private. I told my father that I felt other family members had a right to know about the pattern of behavior that my mother and Karen had shown. I explained that children's safety was more important than family privacy, and that I wouldn't be able to live with myself if another child was endangered because I had kept quiet about what I knew. My father said that he understood my concerns but that he wished I had talked to him before sending the email. He said that he was still trying to decide what to do about his marriage to my mother, and that my email had put additional pressure on him to make a decision quickly. 2 days after I sent the email, I got a call from Karen's husband Tom. He told me that he had filed for divorce and that he was seeking primary custody of Gemma and Luke. He said that the information about Karen's previous behavior with other children had been the final straw for him. He was worried about what Karen might do to their own children if she was willing to abandon other people's children. Tom also told me that he had been documenting Karen's behavior for several months because he had been concerned about her parenting. He said that she had been increasingly neglectful of Gemma and Luke, often leaving them alone while she went out with friends. He said that the zoo incident had convinced him that Karen was not a safe person to have around children. I felt bad that Tom's marriage was ending, but I also felt like he was making the right decision to protect his children. I told him that I would be willing to provide him with copies of the security footage and the zoo's report if he needed them for his custody case. A week later, my father called me again with more news. He said that he had decided to separate from my mother and that he was moving out of their house. He said that he couldn't continue to be married to someone who would endanger children and then lie about it. He also said that he was worried about my mother's judgment and whether she was mentally competent to make decisions about other people's safety. My father told me that my mother had been having difficulty accepting that people knew about what she had done. She had been calling family members and trying to convince them that I had made up the story about the zoo incident. She had also been claiming that the security footage had been doctored and that the zoo's report was inaccurate. This behavior concerned me because it showed that my mother was still not taking responsibility for her actions. Instead of apologizing and trying to make amends, she was continuing to lie and trying to make me look like the problem. This made me feel more confident that I had made the right decision to keep Ford away from her. My father also told me that he had spoken with the director of the animal shelter where my mother volunteers. The director had decided to terminate my mother's volunteer position because she felt that someone who would abandon a child could not be trusted to work with children at the shelter. My mother had been very upset about losing her volunteer position, especially since it had been a big part of her identity in the community. At this point, I realized that the consequences of my mother's and Karen's actions were extending far beyond just their relationship with Ford. Their willingness to endanger a child and then lie about it had damaged their relationships with multiple family members and had affected their standing in the community. I also learned that Karen had been posting on social media about the situation. She had been claiming that I was a vindictive person who was trying to destroy her family because I was jealous of her success. She had also been saying that the zoo incident had been blown out of proportion and that children get lost at public places all the time. Several friends and family members had contacted me to ask about Karen's social media posts. I had provided them with copies of the security footage and the zoo's report so that they could see what had actually happened. Most people were shocked by the evidence and said that they couldn't believe Karen was still trying to defend her actions. The situation has been very stressful for Brock and me, but we both feel like we made the right decision to protect Ford. He has been asking fewer questions about his grandmother and aunt, and he seems to be adjusting to their absence from his life. We've been making sure to spend extra time with him and to create positive experiences that will help him feel secure and loved. Looking back, I wish I had paid more attention to the warning signs that other family members had tried to share with me. If I had known about the previous incidents with Sophie and Michael, I never would have allowed my mother and Karen to take Ford to the zoo. However, I'm glad that I now know the truth about their behavior, even though it's been painful to learn. Update 3: It's been 4 months since my last update, and I wanted to share what has happened since then. This will be my final update because I think the situation has reached its conclusion. The first major development was that Tom was awarded primary custody of Gemma and Luke. The court was very concerned about the evidence showing that Karen had repeatedly left children unsupervised in dangerous situations. The judge said that Karen's pattern of behavior showed a disregard for child safety that made her unsuitable for primary custody. Tom has been very good about keeping me informed about how the children are doing. He said that Gemma and Luke have been asking about Ford and wondering why they don't see him anymore. Tom has been honest with them about what happened at the zoo, in an age-appropriate way. He told them that their mother made some poor choices that put Ford in danger, and that's why the families aren't spending time together anymore. Karen has been allowed supervised visitation with Gemma and Luke, but she has to have a court-appointed supervisor present at all times. According to Tom, she has been angry about this arrangement and has been trying to convince the children that their father is being unfair to her. The court supervisor has had to intervene several times when Karen has tried to badmouth Tom during visits. My father followed through on his decision to separate from my mother. He moved into a small apartment across town and filed for divorce. He told me that he had tried to work things out with my mother, but she had refused to take responsibility for what she had done. She had continued to claim that everyone was overreacting and that she had done nothing wrong. According to my father, my mother had become increasingly isolated after losing her volunteer position at the animal shelter. She had been asked to step down from several other community organizations after word spread about what had happened at the zoo. My father said that she had been spending most of her time at home and had been refusing to see friends or family members. About 6 weeks ago, my father called me with concerning news. He said that he had gone to the house to pick up some of his belongings and had found my mother in a very poor state. She had not been taking care of herself properly and the house had been in disarray. He said that she had been talking to herself and making comments that didn't make sense. My father had convinced my mother to see a doctor, and she had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. The doctor said that the condition could have been affecting her judgment and decision-making for some time. This news made my father feel guilty about leaving her, but the doctor assured him that dementia doesn't excuse dangerous behavior and that he had been right to protect himself and others. Learning about my mother's diagnosis made me feel conflicted. On one hand, it provided a possible explanation for her behavior at the zoo and her inability to take responsibility for her actions afterward. On the other hand, it didn't change the fact that she had put Ford in danger and that I needed to continue protecting him. My father asked me if I would be willing to visit my mother now that we knew about her condition. I told him that I would need to think about it. I discussed the situation with Brock, and we decided that we would not allow Ford to spend time with my mother, even with her diagnosis. We felt that her condition made her even less suitable to be around children unsupervised. However, I did decide to visit my mother one time to see how she was doing. I went to the house with my father, and I was shocked by what I found. My mother seemed confused and disoriented, and she kept asking me the same questions over and over. At one point, she asked me where Ford was and why he hadn't come to visit her. When I reminded her about what had happened at the zoo, she seemed genuinely confused and said she didn't remember anything about it. This visit was very difficult for me. Part of me felt sad to see my mother in such a deteriorated state. But another part of me was still angry about what she had done to Ford, regardless of whether she remembered it or not. I realized that I had spent months processing the betrayal and the lies, and seeing her confusion didn't erase those feelings. My father has been working with social services to arrange proper care for my mother. She is now living in a memory care facility where she can receive the supervision and medical attention she needs. My father visits her regularly, but he has said that she often doesn't recognize him or remember that they are divorced. Karen's situation has been different. She has not been diagnosed with any medical conditions, and she continues to maintain that she did nothing wrong at the zoo. According to Tom, she has been telling people that I manipulated the security footage and that the zoo's report was falsified. She has also been claiming that my mother's dementia diagnosis proves that she wasn't responsible for what happened. Tom has been documenting Karen's continued refusal to accept responsibility for her actions. He said that this behavior has been helpful in his custody case because it shows that Karen is not capable of making good decisions about child safety. The court has been very concerned about Karen's inability to acknowledge her mistakes and learn from them. About a month ago, Karen tried to contact me directly for the first time since the zoo incident. She called me and said that she wanted to apologize and rebuild our relationship. However, when I asked her to specifically acknowledge what she had done wrong at the zoo, she became defensive and said that I was being unreasonable. She said that she had already apologized and that I needed to move on. I told Karen that I had not received any genuine apology from her. I explained that a real apology would involve taking full responsibility for her actions, acknowledging the harm she had caused, and making a commitment to change her behavior. I said that her continued attempts to minimize what had happened showed that she was not truly sorry. Karen became angry and said that I was being vindictive and that I was keeping Ford away from his family out of spite. She said that she missed him and that he probably missed her too. I told her that Ford's safety was my priority, and that I would not allow him to spend time with someone who had shown such poor judgment about child safety. Since that conversation, Karen has been posting on social media about how I have turned the family against her. She has been claiming that I am a manipulative person who has brainwashed other family members into believing lies about her. Several mutual friends have contacted me to ask about these posts, and I have shared the security footage with them so they can see what actually happened. The extended family has essentially split into two groups. Most people have sided with me after seeing the evidence of what happened at the zoo. However, a few family members have continued to support Karen and my mother, claiming that families should stick together no matter what. These relationships have been permanently damaged, and I don't expect them to be repaired. Brock and I have been focusing on building positive relationships with the family members who have been supportive. We have been spending more time with Brock's family and with my father when he is available. Ford has been thriving with these relationships, and he rarely asks about his grandmother and aunt anymore. Ford will be turning 6 next month, and we are planning a small party at our house. We will be inviting close friends and supportive family members, but we will not be including anyone who has shown poor judgment about child safety. I want Ford to have a happy birthday celebration surrounded by people who truly care about his well-being. Looking back on this entire situation, I am grateful that I discovered the truth about my mother's and Karen's behavior before something worse happened. The security footage from the zoo provided undeniable evidence of what they had done, and it prevented them from continuing to lie about their actions. I have learned that it's important to trust my instincts when it comes to protecting my child. I had felt uneasy about allowing my mother and Karen to take Ford to the zoo, but I had ignored those feelings because I wanted to maintain family harmony. Now I know that my child's safety is more important than keeping other people happy. The situation has also taught me that some people are not capable of taking responsibility for their actions, even when faced with clear evidence of wrongdoing. Both my mother and Karen showed a pattern of endangering children and then lying about it afterward. This behavior is not something that can be easily forgiven or forgotten. I have had to accept that my family will never be the same after this incident. The relationships that were damaged may never be fully repaired, and some family members will always be excluded from our lives. However, I believe that protecting Ford from people who have shown poor judgment about child safety is worth the cost of these broken relationships. Brock has been incredibly supportive throughout this entire process. He has never questioned my decision to keep Ford away from my mother and Karen, and he has been willing to deal with the family drama that resulted from my actions. Having a partner who prioritizes our child's safety above all else has made this difficult situation more manageable. Ford seems to have adjusted well to the changes in our family structure. He has stopped asking about his grandmother and aunt, and he appears to be happy with the family members who remain in his life. We have been careful not to speak negatively about my mother and Karen in front of him, but we have also been honest about why certain people are no longer part of our lives. I want to thank everyone who commented on my previous posts and offered support and advice. Reading your responses helped me realize that I was not overreacting to the situation and that protecting my child was the right thing to do. Your encouragement gave me the strength to stand up to family members who were trying to minimize what had happened. For anyone else who might be dealing with similar situations, I want to emphasize the importance of trusting your instincts and prioritizing your child's safety. Family relationships are important, but they should never come at the expense of a child's well-being. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to keep your child away from people who have shown they cannot be trusted. I don't expect to post any more updates about this situation. My mother is receiving the care she needs for her dementia, and Karen is dealing with the consequences of her actions through the court system. Ford is safe and happy, and that's what matters most to me. We are moving forward with our lives and building positive relationships with people who truly care about our family's well-being. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. I got pregnant at 19 and my parents helped me raise my son. Until they tried to force me to give him up for adoption. I fled to my sister's house and now they're threatening legal action. I never thought I'd be posting here, but I'm at my wit's end. I'm a 22-year-old single mom to my amazing 2-year-old son, Ethan. His father isn't in the picture, and I've been raising him with the help of my parents. I got pregnant unexpectedly when I was 19, during my second year of college. I was studying graphic design and had dreams of working for a big advertising agency one day. Those dreams came to a screeching halt when I saw those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. When I told my parents, their reaction was exactly what I'd feared. My mom cried for days, lamenting about how I'd ruined my future. My dad couldn't even look at me for a week. They come from a conservative background, and having a child out of wedlock was something they never imagined for their daughter. The father, my boyfriend at the time, freaked out when I told him. He accused me of trying to trap him and said he wanted nothing to do with the baby. I haven't heard from him since, and honestly, I'm glad. I don't need that kind of negativity in Ethan's life. After the initial shock wore off, my parents slowly came around. They said they'd support me if I decided to keep the baby, which I had already decided I would. I dropped out of college and moved back home. It wasn't ideal, but I was grateful for their help. The pregnancy was tough. I had terrible morning sickness that lasted all day, and I was constantly exhausted. My mom took me to all my appointments and helped me prepare for the baby's arrival. Despite their initial disappointment, I could see my parents getting excited about becoming grandparents. Ethan was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in April. The moment I held him in my arms, I knew all the struggles had been worth it. My parents fell in love with him instantly. For a while, everything seemed perfect. They doted on Ethan, and I was able to work part-time at a local coffee shop while they watched him. But as Ethan grew older, things started to change. It began with small comments here and there. My mom would criticize the way I dressed him or the food I gave him. She'd say things like, "Don't you think he's a bit young for solid foods? Or why is he wearing that? It's too cold outside." I brushed it off at first, thinking she was just being a concerned grandmother. However, as time went on, their behavior became more controlling. They started dictating every aspect of Ethan's life, from his sleep schedule to the toys he played with. If I tried to do things differently, they'd accuse me of being an irresponsible mother. My dad, who had always been more laid back, started backing up my mom's decisions. He'd say things like, "Listen to your mother, she raised you and your sister, she knows what she's doing." It felt like I was being pushed out of my role as Ethan's mother. To make matters worse, my mom started making hurtful comments about my appearance. I had gained weight during my pregnancy and struggled to lose it while juggling motherhood and work. She'd make snide remarks like, "Are you sure you want that second helping? Or you really should start exercising more. No man will want you looking like that." Her words cut deep, especially since I was already feeling insecure about my body. I tried to explain how her comments hurt me, but she'd brush it off, saying she was just looking out for my health and future. The final straw came last week. Ethan was due for his scheduled vaccinations, and I had made an appointment with his pediatrician. The night before, my mom casually mentioned that she'd been reading about the dangers of vaccines online. She suggested that maybe we should hold off on getting Ethan vaccinated. I was shocked. My mom had always been pro-vaccine when I was growing up. I told her that I'd done my research and was comfortable with the doctor's recommendations. She seemed to let it go, but the next morning when I was getting ready to leave, I couldn't find my car keys anywhere. After searching for half an hour, I confronted my parents. My mom admitted that she had hidden the keys. She said she couldn't let me poison her grandson with those vaccines. I was furious. I told her she had no right to make medical decisions for my child. We got into a heated argument, with my dad eventually stepping in to back up my mom. In the end, I had to call a cab to take Ethan to his appointment. The whole ride there, I was seething with anger and hurt. How could they undermine me like this? When we got back home, my parents were waiting for us. They sat me down for what they called a serious talk. They told me that if I wanted to continue living in their house, I needed to raise Ethan according to their rules and values. They criticized my parenting style, saying I was too lenient and that Ethan needed more discipline. Then came the kicker. My mom suggested that if I couldn't raise Ethan properly, maybe I should consider giving him up for adoption so he could be raised by a real family. I was stunned. How could she even suggest such a thing? Ethan is my world. The thought of giving him up is unimaginable. I have an older sister, Emma, who's 28 and lives in another state. We've always been close, despite the age gap. She moved away right after college, and now I understand why. She doesn't have much contact with our parents, usually just a call on holidays and birthdays. After this conversation with my parents, I called Emma in tears and told her everything. She wasn't surprised. She revealed that our parents had always been controlling, which is why she moved so far away. She told me about incidents from her childhood that I was too young to remember or understand at the time. Emma offered to let Ethan and me stay with her for a while, to get away from the toxic environment. Part of me wants to take her up on the offer, but I'm scared. I've never lived anywhere else. The thought of uprooting our lives is terrifying. But staying here is becoming unbearable. Every day is filled with tension and criticism. I'm constantly walking on eggshells, afraid of doing something that will set my parents off. I can see how it's affecting Ethan too. He's become more withdrawn and clingy lately. I feel stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, I'm grateful for my parents' help. Without them, I don't know how I would have managed these past few years. They've provided a roof over our heads and helped with childcare while I worked. The thought of losing that support is scary. On the other hand, I can't let them control my son's life or undermine my parenting. I'm worried about how this will affect Ethan in the long run. He loves his grandparents, but I don't want him growing up in such a tense environment or thinking it's okay for others to disrespect his mother. I've been trying to save money, but between diapers, food, and other necessities, there isn't much left at the end of each month. The thought of trying to support Ethan on my own is daunting. But maybe it's necessary for both our sakes. I don't know what to do. Should I take my sister up on her offer and move? Should I try to find a way to move out on my own, even though it would be a financial struggle? Or should I try to set firmer boundaries with my parents while still living here? Any advice would be appreciated. I feel like I'm drowning and I don't know how to come up for air. Update 1. It's been a few weeks since my original post, and I wanted to update you all on what's happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments and advice. Your words gave me the courage to take action. After a lot of soul-searching and several long conversations with Emma, I decided to take her up on her offer. The realization that staying with my parents wasn't healthy for me or Ethan finally outweighed my fear of change. I didn't tell my parents about my decision right away. Instead, I spent a week quietly packing our essential belongings when they weren't around. It was harder than I expected, both emotionally and logistically. Every item I packed brought back memories, both good and bad. There was the tiny onesie Ethan wore home from the hospital, now too small for him but impossible for me to part with. The photo albums my mom had meticulously put together, documenting every milestone of Ethan's life. The handmade quilt my grandmother had given me when I told her I was pregnant, one of the few family members who had been unconditionally supportive from the start. As I packed, I found myself reminiscing about the good times too. The day my dad taught Ethan how to blow bubbles in the backyard, both of them laughing uncontrollably. The times my mom would sing lullabies to Ethan, the same one she used to sing to me as a child. It made me question my decision more than once, but then I'd remember the controlling behavior, the hurtful comments, the constant criticism, and I knew I was making the right choice. While packing, I also reached out to my boss at the coffee shop. Sarah has always been understanding about my situation as a single mom. When I explained what was happening, she was incredibly supportive. She not only agreed to give me a good reference for job hunting in Emma's city but also offered to let me pick up extra shifts before I left to earn some extra money for the move. The day before we were set to leave, I finally sat my parents down to tell them about our decision. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say countless times, but when the moment came, all my carefully prepared words flew out of my head. My mom's reaction was explosive. She burst into tears, alternating between accusing me of being ungrateful and begging me not to take her grandson away. She brought up every sacrifice they had made for me, from letting me move back into helping with Ethan. It was hard not to feel guilty, but I stood my ground. My dad's reaction was quieter but no less hurtful. He said I was making a huge mistake and that I'd come crawling back when I realized how hard it was to raise a child on my own. His words stung, but they also reinforced that I was making the right choice. I told them that I loved them, but I couldn't allow them to control my life or Ethan's anymore. I explained that their behavior had been harmful and that I needed to do what was best for my son and myself. The next morning was chaos. Emma arrived early to help us move, and my parents refused to come out of their room at first. As we were loading the car, my mom came running out, sobbing and begging me not to take her grandson away. It was one of the hardest moments of my life. I hugged her, told her I loved her, and said that they were welcome to visit if they could respect my boundaries as a parent. The drive to Emma's place was long and emotional. Ethan was confused and kept asking for his grandparents. I did my best to explain that we were going on an adventure to live with Aunt Emma for a while. I tried to make it sound exciting, but my heart was breaking. Emma was incredibly supportive throughout the journey, reassuring me that I was doing the right thing and distracting Ethan with games and stories. We've been at Emma's place for a week now, and it's been a whirlwind of emotions. Ethan is slowly adjusting to the new environment. He's fascinated by Emma's cat, something we couldn't have at my parents' house because of my dad's allergies. Emma has been amazing, helping with childcare and giving me space to process everything that's happened. I've started job hunting and looking for affordable daycare options. It's overwhelming, but I already feel a sense of freedom I haven't experienced in years. Simple things like deciding what to feed Ethan for dinner without criticism or choosing his clothes without someone second-guessing me feel liberating. My parents have been calling and texting nonstop since we left. At first, it was a barrage of guilt-tripping messages and angry voicemails. Now, they seem to have calmed down a bit. I've been keeping my responses brief and polite, but firm. I've made it clear that while I'm open to rebuilding our relationship in the future, it will have to be on my terms, with respect for my role as Ethan's mother. There have been moments of doubt, especially when Ethan asks about his grandparents or when I'm lying awake at night worrying about our future. But then I'll have a moment, like yesterday when Ethan and I had an impromptu dance party in Emma's living room, where I realized that this newfound freedom is worth the struggle. I know this isn't going to be easy. I'm nervous about finding a job, about being able to support Ethan on my own, about navigating this new life. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. Thank you all again for your support and advice. It really gave me the courage to make this difficult but necessary change. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have been going. Life has been a roller coaster, but we're slowly finding our footing in our new reality. First, the good news: I found a job. It's an entry-level position at a local marketing firm. The pay isn't amazing, but it's enough to cover our basic expenses, and there's room for growth. My new boss, Lisa, seems understanding about my situation as a single mom, which is a huge relief. She's even allowed me to have a flexible schedule so I can drop off and pick up Ethan from daycare. Speaking of daycare, we finally found an affordable one that Ethan seems to enjoy. It was a struggle at first. He cried every morning when I dropped him off, which broke my heart. But now, he's made some little friends and gets excited to go. The staff there are wonderful and have been so patient with him as he adjusts. Emma has been an absolute lifesaver through all of this. She's been helping with Ethan while I work, and on the days when she's not available, she introduced me to her neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, a retired teacher who's been happy to babysit occasionally. Ethan adores her, especially when she reads him stories in funny voices. Ethan is adjusting well to his new surroundings, all things considered. He still asks about his grandparents sometimes, which is hard. But he's also enjoying the new experiences. He loves the park near Emma's house, especially the duck pond. We try to go there every weekend, and it's become our special time together. Now, for the more challenging part, my parents. They haven't given up on trying to get us to come back. At first, it was daily calls and texts, alternating between guilt-tripping and angry outbursts. I've had to be firm about maintaining boundaries, which hasn't been easy. There are days when I just want to give in, to have their help and support again. But then I remember why we left, and I stand my ground. Last week, things took an unexpected turn. My parents showed up unannounced at Emma's place. I was at work, but Emma called me immediately. She said they were demanding to see Ethan and threatening to call the police if we didn't let them in. Emma stood her ground and refused to let them in without my permission. I rushed home, feeling a mix of anger and anxiety. When I arrived, I found my parents still outside, my mom in tears and my dad red-faced with anger. I took a deep breath and approached them calmly. I told them that their behavior was unacceptable and that if they couldn't respect my boundaries, they wouldn't be allowed to see Ethan at all. We had a long, emotionally charged conversation right there on the front lawn. I explained how their controlling behavior had affected me and why I needed to make this change for Ethan's sake and my own. I told them about the anxiety I'd been living with, always worrying about their judgment and criticism. I shared how their words had chipped away at my self-esteem and confidence as a mother. It was hard, but I stood my ground. I think seeing me so firm and hearing how their actions had affected me really hit home for them. My mom broke down crying, not the manipulative tears from before, but real, heartbroken sobs. My dad, who's always been more stoic, actually had tears in his eyes too. In the end, they left without seeing Ethan that day. But the conversation seemed to have an impact. My mom called the next day, apologizing for their behavior. She said they've realized they might lose us completely if they don't change their approach. It was the first time I'd ever heard her apologize like that. We've agreed to try a supervised visit next weekend. I'm nervous about it, but I'm hoping it's a step in the right direction. I've made it clear that any future relationship will depend on their ability to respect my role as Ethan's mother and my right to make decisions for my family. Through all of this, I've been amazed by the strength I've found within myself. It's not easy standing up to my parents, but every time I do, I feel more confident in my abilities as a mother and as an independent adult. I'm rediscovering the person I was before I became a mom, the girl who had dreams and ambitions. I've even started sketching again in my free time, something I haven't done since I dropped out of my graphic design program. It's not much, just doodles really, but it feels good to reconnect with that part of myself. Emma has been encouraging me to pursue it more, saying I could maybe do some freelance design work on the side once we're more settled. There's still a long road ahead, but I'm feeling more optimistic about our future. Ethan and I are building a new life here, one where we're both free to grow and thrive. It's not always easy, but seeing Ethan happy and carefree makes it all worth it. Thank you all for your continued support and advice. It means more than you know. Update 3, it's been 3 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some developments in our situation. The supervised visit with my parents went better than expected. They were on their best behavior, probably realizing it was their chance to prove they could respect boundaries. Ethan was happy to see them, which was both heartwarming and a little bittersweet. Watching him run into their arms made me realize how much I'd missed seeing that connection, despite everything that had happened. Since then, we've had a few more visits, always supervised and on neutral ground. It's been a slow process, but I'm seeing small improvements in their behavior. They're learning to ask before giving Ethan treats or making decisions about his care. There have been a few slip-ups, like when my mom tried to insist on Ethan wearing a sweater on a warm day, but they're trying. My job is going well. I've even gotten a small raise, which has helped ease our financial situation a bit. Lisa, my boss, has been mentoring me, helping me brush up on my design skills. She's even let me assist on a few small projects. It feels good to be using my creativity again. Ethan is thriving in his new daycare. He's made a best friend, a little girl named Zoe, and they're inseparable. His vocabulary has exploded, and he's becoming quite the little chatterbox. Sometimes, when he learns a new word, I can see him hesitate before using it, like he's waiting for someone to correct him. It breaks my heart a little, reminding me of how controlling my parents were, but I always make sure to encourage him. Emma continues to be an incredible support. She's not only helped with Ethan but has also been teaching me how to budget and manage my finances better. I'm slowly building up my savings, with the goal of eventually finding our own place. As much as I appreciate Emma's help, I know we can't stay with her forever. There was one incident last month that tested our progress. Ethan got sick with a high fever, and I had to take him to the ER. In my panic, I called my parents without thinking. To my surprise, they were supportive without being overbearing. They offered to come help but respected my decision when I said I could handle it with Emma's help. My mom even called the next day just to check on Ethan, without any criticism or unwanted advice. This experience made me realize how much our relationship has evolved. We're not perfect, and there's still a long way to go, but we're making progress. I'm learning to set and maintain boundaries, not just with my parents but in all aspects of my life. It's not always easy, but I'm growing stronger and more confident every day. I've also started attending a support group for single parents. It's been incredibly helpful to connect with others who understand what I'm going through. Hearing their stories and sharing my own has been therapeutic in a way I didn't expect. As for my personal life, I've made a few friends at work and through the single parents group. It's nice to have adult conversations that don't revolve around diapers or tantrums. I'm not ready to think about dating yet, but it's good to know that there's a whole world out there beyond being just a mom. Ethan and I have settled into a routine here. We have pancakes every Sunday morning, followed by a trip to the duck pond. On Saturdays, we explore a new part of the city. Last week, we found a small art museum with a children's area where Ethan got to paint on a giant canvas. Seeing his face light up as he created his masterpiece reminded me of my own love for art. There are still challenging days, of course. Days when I'm exhausted from working and parenting, when I miss the help my parents used to provide. Days when Ethan has a meltdown in the grocery store and I can almost hear my mother's critical voice in my head. But then there are moments, like when Ethan hugs me tight and says I love you, mommy unprompted, that make it all worthwhile. I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. I know there will be more challenges ahead, but I feel better equipped to handle them now. Thank you all for being part of this journey with me. Your support and advice have been invaluable.